Welcome to This is Concrete, a podcast where we speak with the people whose work revolves around concrete and coatings. Let's get to what you came for.
Hello, I'm Chad Gill. I'm the host of the This is Concrete podcast, where I talk with leaders in facilities management, architecture, contracting, and more. So this episode is brought to you by Concrete. Concrete is a concrete polishing and coatings company with nearly 20 years of experience working in commercial, industrial, and residential markets. So whether you need smooth transitions for warehouse traffic, a show-stopping lobby floor, or a seamless concrete accent wall, we can provide the skill and imagination you need to make your concrete uncommon. Our broadcast is also brought to you by Workforce Recon, which is a project tracking software that connects offices to field crews. It's developed by contractors for contractors and includes time tracking, messaging, and most importantly, job documentation and scheduling, all in one place so you can find out what's going on rather than what happened. So if you want to learn more about that, check us out at workforcerecon.com and see your operation in real time. All right, so joining me today is Jeff Bonkiewicz, and I should have asked him how to pronounce it to make sure I got it right before we started, but it won't be the only mistake I make today. So he is currently the VP of Sales at Polished Concrete Consultants and the former channel manager at Ladder Creek. I'm sure if you know him at all, and you probably do, you're going to know and recognize his brand because he's 6 feet tall, and that's 6'4", 6'5" with the hair.
With the hair. That's right, Chad. Thank you. Yeah, good to be here.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you agreeing to come on and talk to us about polished concrete and kind of, I guess, to start with, how did you kind of, you technical writer, software background, coder,
right?
How do you come to concrete from there?
Yeah, it's weird. So if we flash back, man, like 13, 14 years ago, Chad, I was kind of looking. This was right around the time of the economic collapse in 2008. And I got on with a contractor in Omaha. At the time, his name was Masonry Precast, and he did a lot of masonry precast cleaning. And I got to know sealers pretty well working for that guy. And he did some specialty work. He did retrofit, but he also did new construction as well. He did was probably 60% masonry to 40% precast and horizontal concrete surfaces. Did a little bit of decorative, but not much. And anyway, let me put this on Do Not Disturb here really quick, Chad. There we go. I should have done that beforehand as usual.
Oh, no problem.
There we go. Okay. And kind of taught me a little bit of the ropes with concrete. And from there, I went to L&M Construction Chemicals. And this was, again, 13 years ago or so. And L&M is no longer around, but they were bought up by Ladder-Crete, but that's another story. And people may remember that, they may not know. But I worked for Greg Schweitz in a sales and marketing capacity. And Greg had been in the industry, concrete, for 40 years. And a lot of people knew Greg. And Greg's still awesome. He's a really good friend of mine and mentor of mine I keep in contact with. And he was really the one that, I guess, his passion for the industry definitely transferred on to me. And I was in a lot of his trainings. I traveled the U.S. with Greg. I got to work with the guys in the field. I got to know the sales guys really well. And, Greg just sent me everywhere. He believed in travel and training and learning new things. And those are things that I value too. And I know those are definitely values of our industry. And I wrote data sheets working for Greg. What else? We launched some products working for Greg. Polishable overlay at the time, that was called Durafloor HP. That's how I got my teeth cut on polishable overlays, many years ago. And when Ladder-Crete bought out L&M, I think that was in December of 2013. Again, basically forever ago now. I survived the limbo and came on as a channel manager, which is essentially a sales and marketing manager for not only construction chemicals, but also for self-leveling underlayment, surface prep, and our resinous flooring line, which was brought on about just shy of a year later when Ladder-Crete bought Spartacoat. So basically, it was a continuation of that job, and I did that for about 9 years. and again, traveled the US, put on trainings, did a ton of trade shows, as you know, the trade show bit, Chad. I went to several ASCC meetings and some ACI meetings as well, got to know people, and just really enjoyed that. And now I got on with David Stevenson at Polished Concrete Consultants, and he and I are working on a project together that we're going to be launching this summer called Expert Concrete Training. And you probably saw me from my YouTube channel that I just launched. It's called Expert Concrete Training, if you want to check it out, where I try to post 2 videos a week about anywhere from basic stuff on concrete, the stuff that we deal with all the time, to more advanced stuff like polishable overlays, as an example.
Yeah, and it's definitely something. I mean, and that's what got me interested in what we were talking about was, the polishable overlays. I mean, they seem like such a great fix for so many of the problems that plague us as polishers and decorative concrete, because you get this blank new canvas that you can start with, but they definitely come with their trade-offs and some downsides.
Yeah, they do. Not least of which is they're not easy, and they're not for the faint of heart. And coming from the manufacturer's perspective of creating these products, trying to get them dialed in, doing some of the testing, which David actually did with us at Latacrete, 8+ years ago, when we were just getting into trying to make that work. We definitely had our fair share of projects go sideways on us, and I'm not afraid to admit it, because that's the truth, A, but B, anybody that's dealt with these things knows that happens quite a bit. And even if you have experience in it, it still doesn't guarantee that you're going to get a good result, right?
For sure. Yeah, you can't win every game. And it's just one of those things that you run into. But where do you see, like, I guess just start like it starts at the bottom. I mean, I would assume that the most important thing to you guys is, you're looking for moisture and you're looking for good surface prep.
Yep. Right. Yeah, we see a lot of people skimp both in both of those areas. And I saw that you had a Josh Jones on not too long ago, and I listened to his with you, and I thought that was great. He said some awesome things, and I first met Josh when I was working for Greg forever ago, and Josh is awesome. But he said some fabulous things about surface prep and about the different types of it, and about CSP and different levels. We just see guys skimp on prep. And, a lot of guys, whether they're doing coatings, and, Josh talks a lot about coatings, or they're doing overlays, skipping on prep in either of those 2 categories is a disaster. And, manufacturers have ways, their technical services guys have ways of determining, what the cause of, what really happened here. And it doesn't take that much forensic detail to really make that determination. And while, a lot of manufacturers will be there for you if something bad happens, they may not necessarily, completely reimburse you, as it were, Chad. And, if something goes sideways on you, I hope that the technical service rep is there for you, because that's what they should be. They should be there for you if there's a problem, because you'll remember that and all that, because that's a part of the job. It's a part of my job historically. But, at the same time, they may, unless they have a goodwill budget, they may or may not, decide to, really help you out. And, one of the things at Latacrete that they did really well there was they would set aside that money for goodwill, and then the regional sales manager or the director of sales would do the evaluation, work with the technical services team to decide what the next best steps were.
That happens. I mean, we've been on jobs where, whether it is us, I mean, I've even shown up on one of my own job sites, and like, why in the world would you? Because yeah, but it's so much faster not to do that. I'm like, well, it's faster not to do the job at all, but we like to get paid, So it's more than sell it than collect the check. There's a big chunk in the middle that you're supposed to do. In fact, the most important part. But yeah, I mean, just simple things like, you grind it really well, but you don't clean it, or you don't get all of the bond breaking, like a grease or a sealer or something off, and those kind of things. I mean, yeah. So when you're dealing with it, is surface prep more or less, or priming more or less important with an overlay than it is a coating? I mean, because you have wood going with you.
I think they're all equally important. And, I think, well, always go by the manufacturer's product data sheet no matter what. And, in my videos, you've probably seen me talk about that endlessly because I've been on dozens and dozens and dozens of the receiving end of people that said they did, but they actually didn't uh, abide by those application instructions or go to the T. And I think with overlays and the same thing kind of with resonance flooring, but with overlays perhaps even more so. If you skimp, you can't expect a good result. And I don't care, which area you skimp. Like if you skimp on the epoxy primer, if you skimp on the mesh sand that maybe you didn't do a full broadcast of the sand, or one of your guys fell asleep on the job and he didn't clean up the sand enough, and there's loose sand, and so that can cause a delamination. Those sorts of things. If with polishable overlays, if the instructions are not followed to a T, then I don't think you can expect a good result for your customer. And again, I've been on so many of these jobs where they went wrong that I was always by the book, always by the book. And by the book, I mean by the product data sheet when it comes to overlays and surface prep.
So if you're not very familiar with putting down an overlay or something like that, there's typically two kinds of primers you're running into: an epoxy with a sand broadcast, and then some just a straight polymer primer. What's the differences? Why one? Why two ways? What's the difference one versus the other?
So I'll talk about the ones that I have dealt with the most, Chad, and that is the ones where you put down the epoxy primer, and then you immediately broadcast sand to rejection. And that sand has to be clean, kiln dried sand, basically any Home Depot sand, if you will, right? We always called it, beaching the primer, and we literally do mean that. And so you're putting way too much sand to full broadcast over that epoxy primer to give it that hard bite. And that's what those overlays need, is that bite, right? Because without that, they won't have anything good, a good enough prepared substrate to bite into in order to fully cure out upon. And so just a part of that's just basically how the product works, right? As far as the other version of it, I'm not that familiar with those, Chad, except that clearly that those products are designed for a lesser profile perhaps, but no sand required, making it a little bit easier to apply that overlay. I don't have any real experience with those. I'm really only familiar with the more aggressive bite and the more thorough prepared surface.
So when you talk about bite, you're saying because concrete doesn't stick to concrete, and cementitious products don't just stick. They use more like a mechanical locking. Is that correct?
Right. Yep.
So you're talking about you're trying to embed the sand, you're kind of stick the sand to the epoxy or whatever resin you're using, and then you're trying to wrap your cementitious coating over top of that particle of sand that's left out to mechanically seize those two together. So your epoxy bonds to your substrate and the sand, and then the sand bonds to your overlay.
Correct.
Perfect. So now we're getting ready to pour out our overlay. Where do you see people go? Or you get the sand, you prepped it well, you shot blasted, you're clean, you're primed, you've beached it. That's a new term for me. I like it though. I'm totally going to use that one. Like don't have a beach today. You beach it. You get your sand up. So now we got this abrasive, like 30 grit sandpaper style profile.
Right.
What do we look for now to make sure, before we start, pumping out our overlay?
Well, what we look for now is to make sure that there's no loose sand down there, because loose sand can cause delamination. So I'd make sure that your sand is vacuumed up, swept up, make sure that surface is clean and of course dry. And again, no loose particles, no loose sand there, right? The next thing I think is really important that I think inexperienced guys don't think about, and you definitely see this in resinous flooring with a fast setting material like a polyaspartic, is they don't think about the working rhythm before they start, or they don't put enough guys on the floor, or they think they can do it with two guys when they need at least three, preferably four guys. And so, I always think about a lot of retailers, like in a mall, like the overlays, right? And we'll just pick one for fun, and we'll just pick Foot Locker. Foot Locker is approximately 2,000 to 2,500 square feet. And so say they're going to put down an overlay, they like the overlay, and they like and why they like the overlay is because it's consistent in its appearance, its aesthetics. and it will look the same in the store in Omaha as it will in the store in Kansas City, as it will in the store in Washington, D.C., et cetera. And so for brands, that's why the national accounts, like say a Foot Locker, really like those overlays, because it looks the same no matter where it's applied. Contractors that are inexperienced with overlays don't think about how difficult they are when it comes to, I'd say, sequence, Chad, and actually not only mixing the material, but putting the material out, undermining the fact that the bucket with the water is going to be 60 plus pounds. You might have to move that, halfway across the floor. The Hippo mixers come in really handy, just to throw a name out there. And those were pretty new about 10 years ago when we were first getting started with these. Those make a really big difference in the sequence. What I think, how we've seen some of the jobs kind of go sideways is guys get out of sequence, and then the material is designed to basically harden up and cure up, within 10, 15 minutes. And so if your guys are farting around and they're looking at their phone, or they're doing those things that normal human beings do, you can't do that, right? Because you got to maintain that wet edge. And if there's a cold joint there, that's going to shine right through, and that's going to show. And it might even be a different color, and then the owner's not going to like that. And so, we always said in resinous flooring, when I was selling Spartacoat, you have to maintain the wet edge. Overlays are no different. You have to maintain that wet edge. And so, to answer your question, I think that A, they don't think it all the way through. B, they don't put enough manpower on the overlay job. And I think that they can tend to undermine how much work these actually are.
And I would add to that the idea that most of the time you're selling an overlay to a client who is part of the sales pitch on an overlay is, hey, we're going to get you a consistent, repeatable finish. So this doesn't leave you any kind of tolerance to the idea of the polisher mentality of, well, this is what I had when I got here and I made it shiny and this is what you get. The overlay, you brought your canvas with you. These are your brushes,
Right.
you paint, but it's supposed to look like you said.
Right.
The tolerance is thin there with
it is
expensive product.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, I think, again, I don't think that a lot of guys have, talk to your technical service rep first. I think that's really the best advice is talk to your rep, and an experienced rep preferably, to get a feel for it. I mean, maybe you win a job at $15 or something. If so, good. Hopefully good for you. Hopefully you bid it right. Do note, and speaking of that $15 number, the average polished concrete, roughly ballpark figure number for a polished concrete job today, I think is right around $350. It's not very expensive, right? Overlays should be way higher than that. And I always like to stress at least a ballpark figure for contractors are relatively new, but even the experienced guys, I'd like to know where they're at too, just so that I know as an industry guy where you ought to be, versus if you're new and you're like at 9, dude, no, or 8, no, you don't want to do that. And so I like talking those numbers with our experienced guys, but also with the inexperienced guys, just to see the differential there. But for those that are new to them and new to their installations, and if you're looking to bid them, do note that you're going to be bidding substantially higher than a normal polished concrete job, because they're just that much more work, and they're that much more difficult to really get a good result for your customer.
And there's nothing at all. I can't think of a single shared skill between polishing concrete and pouring an overlay. And then I say that in a way to mean they may be two completely different crews. They may, you're not necessarily going to find somebody that can do both. I mean, this is an auto mechanic and a plumber. Yeah, there's tubes in both, but this isn't the same animal. And I think that's something that contractors kind of think, oh, well, my guys can do this, and they can. It's not not super hard, but it's not natural. As a natural sequence of polishing.
Right. And even you were talking about places where you can potentially mess it up. even after you successfully pour it out, you could overwork the surface. You could underwork the surface. I was on a job once in Austin, Texas in June, and Austin's great and everything, but it's 110 degrees in June, and it's about 95% humidity in June. And this was in a lobby, if you will, lobby area in an office that was not air conditioned, of course, and we didn't have access to cold water. And one of the tricks or tips of the trade with overlays is if you're in a high temperature, high humidity environment, man, you got to use cold water. And if you don't have access to that, go get it. Like, go get ice. Go get huge ice buckets. I mean, I don't care. I mean, you're really only looking at 4.5 quarts per 50-pound bag for mixing. Go get that ice water. We didn't have that, and it went completely ape shit on us. It just did, and there was just nothing we could really do about it except go drink and then come back the next day and demo it out.
Boy, that's going to be a bear to get out. Yeah. And sometimes you're stuck with that. I mean, that's just the way it rolls. That's the joy of contracting.
Right.
How thin? So when you're talking about overlays, what kind of thickness and thinness can you operate in?
Yeah. So, a lot of manufacturers say 3/8, Chad, and I think 3/8 is okay. I prefer to see a half, really, because, again, you never really know what you're dealing with. Even if you think you do, you probably don't. And so, like you, I mean, I have seen a lot of burn throughs, and there is no good fix for a burn through. And for those of you that may not know that terminology, it is when the floor is uneven, it's not level, or there's just bumps in the floor or whatever, and you've got a bird bath in that floor. You could essentially, or even more bumps in that floor. It'll go down into the floor. Then you're in your grinder over that. It will show the maybe not necessarily the original substrate, but it'll show like your epoxy and your sand broadcast there. So you could burn through your overlay right into your sand broadcast, as an example. That's damn near impossible to fix. That's why I like a thicker overlay pour with the intention of polishing it, Chad, because those things happen. Maybe they don't happen a lot, but they happen. And again, it's one of those things that it's better to, in my opinion, put down more material than not enough material.
Yeah, the extra you spend will never pay for it'll pay on comparison time to go back, because you're right. A burn through, you're talking about redoing at least that room.
Right.
And that's after you demo, because you need to transition to other spaces as well.
Right.
So with overlays, one of the things we run into is timing, not just to place it and that kind of thing. Although, just as a side note, we did do an overlay job, and we left. It looked so good. We were so happy. And we walked out the door, and we came in the next morning. You could see where a raccoon had walked through and inspected the job for us. That was a Pete's Coffee, and we had to sell that as a decorative feature. Bass Pro pays extra for that. So
yep, that's right. That's excellent character for that floor. Character
for sure.
Marks.
Made him a plaque and a picture. We caught the guy, but my guys really did catch him in a box later the next night. But but when you're talking about these things, there's the whole thing of, you can't pour an overlay and then plan to come back. You don't pour it on a Friday and come back on Monday to polish it for many of these.
No. Yeah. And again, consult your manufacturer's product data sheet for timing on this. But, we were typically in the 12 to 24 hour range, Chad. And, most guys want to get on it right away. And I get that, just part of sequence. But, pour out on, 4 p.m. on whatever on, Wednesday, and then come back at, first thing in the morning on Thursday, and you can probably grind it. But again, consult your manufacturer's product data sheet, to know for sure. But guys, if you wait too long, that is a disaster too, because I've been on those jobs too. And then they wait 48 hours, or maybe for some reason they couldn't get access to the job after that. So it's 72 hours later, and they're trying to cut in and they can't cut in, Chad. And I'm sure you've probably seen that or heard that or been a part of one of those jobs. And these overlays are designed to get high strength really fast. And, it's pretty common for them to get in the, 3, 4, 5,000 PSI range, what Chad within a couple of days. And, cutting into, 4 or 5,000 PSI is not fun. And, again, they're designed to do that and give you that quick return of service. But, the timing of the cut, especially that first cut, is really important.
Yeah, it's like there's many of them have that skin on the top or a film. I guess maybe that's the to help it cure. Is that what that's about?
I believe so, as a part of the product curing out. Yeah.
So when you're doing that, so dry polishing and overlay versus what I mean, the good news is poured out correctly, worked correctly. You will be working on a very flat surface, which is a huge advantage to polishing. You can turn out some beautiful work. You
Right.
shouldn't have any issues with grouting or pinholes or anything along that line. It's just, can you get there before your surface hardness gets up? And again, that's manpower also, because if you pour 12,000 feet of it in a day, that's a huge pour.
That is.
You better get your first cut done on 12,000 the next day. Don't start in one corner and work your way out, because it's going to get harder all day.
Yeah, that's right. And again, that boils down to planning and what your rhythm is going to be. And, I think, I don't think that, that they think about that enough, to have, the vision of the entire job and to really think it through, and even thinking through problems. And that's a large part of what your technical sales rep ought to be able to help you with. Your expert in the field that knows the product really well, is helping you think through the job before you start it. And like you said, 12,000 feet would be a massive overlay job, or maybe it's a 20,000 foot one. I don't know. I'm not sure how big they're really going these days, but that really needs some planning and some forethought and some real deep thinking before, while even on the job, with one of the experts, before you guys go down and start mixing the product.
Do you see anything different? Like, we met with I talked to Bob Harris a couple of days ago, or maybe a couple of weeks ago. Time's flying. But the what he was talking about is like this new type L cement and things like that, where we're getting different kinds of mix designs coming out. Are overlays changing too? Are they still, what's in an overlay, and why is it different than concrete? And some you can cut wet, some you cannot.
Chad, as far as what I know right now, and again, I'm not a 100%, everything I say is absolutely true and 100% expert in overlays. I mean, I'm still learning too. And that's what I love about our industry is, you should always be learning. But, from my experience, for at least the basis, or the chemistry basis of overlays, they're either cementitious or they're calcium aluminate. And with a cementitious, basically it's cutting just like regular concrete, right? And with the calcium aluminate, that was one of the products that we sold at Latacrete. The self-leveling underlayment was calcium aluminate, and it had polymer in it, and so it cut a little bit differently. And they still have a polishing guide that we definitely recommend that you follow, that our R&D people helped us put together, and so did some industry people too, just because we were figuring it out. And one of the things that I didn't like, as a sales and marketing manager, but kind of as a product manager as well, was R&D versus field. And R&D was always at perfect conditions. And and I know, and anybody that's out there in the field knows that you never ever get 70 and 70, right? This isn't R&D. And so, they're dealing with different constraints, and we guys in the field are dealing with different constraints. And that's why I always like to have people. I mean, we're pretty good about getting contractors involved with product development and getting, as many different variables dialed in as we could, right? And so, even after a product launch, we still haven't necessarily figured it out. And I think that may seem kind of unfair to some people, but we're really more in, manufacturers are really more in partnership with contractors. And manufacturers rely on that customer feedback, that contractor feedback, in order to really help dial in the products. And if we didn't do that, then they may never get released. And just because of liability, mostly because of liability, but also because of reputation. the reputation matters a ton as far as that is concerned in our industry, not only for contractors, but for manufacturers. And if something goes sideways, it's pretty easy for a contractor to blame the manufacturer's product. You know that, Chad. I mean, we hear that all the time. But, usually, a lot of the time, it's not the manufacturer's product. And, one of the things, if you don't mind, Chad, another thing that I would run into, with overlays all the time was cracking. And hairline cracks, maybe even larger cracks than hairline cracks. And, the finger pointing would ensue and it would suck. And, they would want to put it back on the manufacturer and be like, no, you didn't do the prep right. Or, there were conditions at that time that had this happen. So one of the things, again, I'm going to stress surface prep. I'm going to stress the epoxy. I'm going to stress beaching the epoxy, removing the sand, getting a good pour, not overworking the surface, using a spiked roller most likely in order to break that surface tension, or using a tool very similar to a spiked roller, and then getting off of it basically as fast as you can. And again, all of that is to say, read the product data sheet of the manufacturer of the product that you're using. But also, too, especially on those larger jobs that you're talking about, Chad, in the 20,000 feet or so, anything that's in that surface that's below that overlay, like a big crack or like a joint, that has to be honored, because your overlay is going to have that big crack too eventually. That joint is designed to crack. That's what it's for. That's the whole freaking point of the joint. And if that's not honored through the overlay, expect that to crack, right? And in smaller floors, that's less of an issue, but you still see that in smaller floors too. And I think that's such an unfortunately common miss by the contractors, that they don't honor the joints, as an example.
Yeah, I mean, the joints are nothing more than pre-cracks. I mean, that's what they're, like you said, that's their purpose. That's why they're there. Well, hey, this has been terrific. So just two quick questions at the end. The first one is like, so expert training. So what is that going to be? Yeah.
So Expert Concrete Training is an online training platform that David Stevenson and I are putting together to help build up our industry, from basically guys that have been doing polished concrete for, say, a year or 2 years, Chad, all the way to the really experienced guys that have been doing it for 15, 20 years. And, I like the idea of building community, and we have a lot of that in ACI and in ASCC and in iCry, et cetera. I like to build it to help have the experienced guys help the new guys, but also too, there's so many one-offs in our industry that, like, you're never going to know all the one-offs. And this idea is to help bring those one-offs onto a more global scale, if you will, to our world of polished concrete, and to bring it to them on demand. And so Dave and I have been shooting a bunch of videos for over a year, and we have training dedicated to anywhere from pre-construction, specification, all the way through place and finish, curing, execution of the place and finish and the curing. All the way through to polishing, because one of the things that David has struggled with, and I've struggled with too, but more so David, is he goes on jobs to troubleshoot jobs and to help with all the finger pointing that goes on these jobs, especially if they're new construction. And the concrete finisher didn't actually finish the concrete in order for it to be flat enough to be polished properly. And so the polisher takes the blame for that, right? And his whole MO has been, well, if we place the concrete according to specification of the floor flatness of, I think his minimum was, it's either 40 or 50, we'll just say it was 50, then that gives not only the polisher a far better canvas on which to polish, but also it's going to give the owner a far better result, not only out of the gate, but for the long term. So the GC will be happier, the polisher will be happier, the owner will be happier, et cetera, et cetera. And then the polished concrete industry has a better name, and then everybody wins. And so our training that we're putting together is dedicated to that, but in not just polishing, but in the processes before that, even all the way back to specification. And the other one, if you don't mind me including, is maintenance. And one of the things that's very strange, if you will, about the polishing industry is once the polished concrete guy is done with the job, he just wants to get the hell out of there and go on to the next job. I get that. We all get that, right? You want to move on, and you're sick and tired of being there. You just want to be done with it. And you want to be on to the next job. That's just how everybody is. And so nobody really goes back there to maintain it. Well, if you're at a big box retailer, like we'll just say Walmart, I think they have their own maintenance plan. So maybe this isn't such a good example, but Walmart, we'll just say that they outsource it and they have a janitorial supply company come in and then clean the floor every night. Well, they probably don't have a plan in place to do that polishing properly, even though it's actually pretty straightforward. And so, David has, and I've seen it too, but, David goes in there and with these national retailers like a Kroger or a Walmart or a Costco or whomever, or Target, and then he sees the Mars, he sees the scratches, he sees all the waxes, he sees the problems that the janitorial companies leave, and then he knows that it wasn't the polisher, it's been all the improper maintenance that's been done to it. So we're trying to address that too, and unfortunately it's probably going to be more on a more difficult case-by-case basis, but even on a national level of what that actually looks like. And it's going to look pretty similar to like for a Walmart, as for a Target, as for any big box retailer, and really dial that in so that we can hopefully finally get to work on putting that polished concrete maintenance to rest. And just that part alone is a really big endeavor, Chad, because you never know if they're doing it in-house or if they're outsourcing it to a janitorial supply company. But that's still one of the things that's a battle that he and I and the other guys fight all the time. And we fight it not only for the owner, but we fight it for the polisher, and we fight it for our industry, because bad polished concrete maintenance makes us all look bad, because then people think it sucks, and then people think it doesn't last. I had a friend of mine that has been very successful in the restaurant industry here, very successful. He's like, I ditched polished concrete. I'm like, why'd you do that, man? And he's an architect too. He's like, your floors only last 8 to 10 years. And I was like, 8 to 10 years, dude, what do you want? I mean, I think that's pretty damn good. Plus, I got a plan for you to go back in there. I can send a guy in there that can go and bring that back up for like a $1. I mean, your stores are what, 2,000 feet? They go in there for $1.50, maybe $1.75, $2. They bring that right back like that. And you're complaining about 10 years? Like, what are you doing, dude? So anyway, I'm trying to convince him otherwise. But, it's that sort of thing. Like, there's just these misperceptions that, David and I, you, Chad, and all the professionals in our industry have been trying to set the record straight on, no, this is really what's going on. And dispel the gossip. And I felt like that as a manufacturer's sales rep, manufacturer's pro, like that was a large part of our job, was really to this is the way it has to be. And that's why we always tried to stress the product data sheet application, because that's really the way it has to be. And that was a bit of a rant, Chad, but that's kind of the passion behind expert concrete training that we're driving it. And it is due to launch in this summer in June. So look for expert concrete training in mid-June. But there is a YouTube channel up there right now, guys, you can check out. I posted that twice.
Yeah, great. And we'll link to it in the broadcast. And this normally releases in about a month. So we'll begin. It's May now, so that'll be putting us right towards June. So that would time out pretty nicely.
Terrific.
I really appreciate the time and the information. Like I said, I mean, I'm familiar with your battle. I know the efforts. I mean, maintenance, and the tricky part about maintenance is also, as a subcontractor to another sub, perhaps to a general, to an owner, there's no direct path between you and the guy that's actually going to do the maintenance. And finding that path and trying to maintain, unless you were to stain the directions into the floor, it's hard to make sure people know how to maintain it. It's not hard, but It does require some maintenance.
Yep.
Yeah,
correct.
But that's fantastic. Well, hey, I appreciate it. Thanks so much. I look forward to seeing the expert concrete training. I'll definitely check it out. I mean, Lord knows I got plenty to learn. So we'll
Chad.
Goes.
Well, thank you for having me on, and the best of luck. I had to talk to you soon, man.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Joe.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to This is Concrete. We look forward to you joining us next time. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.